Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katie Smoller. I'm the Director of Educational Programs with the National History Academy. And today, as we continue our Hispanic Heritage Month program, we are fortunate to be joined by the San Juan National Historic Site. And we're going to be hearing today from Park Ranger Carlos Almodovar and the Chief of Interpretation, Education, and Fee Program, Kina Gonzalez. So Carlos and Kina, thank you for being with us today. And you are muted, if you could.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you now. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for inviting us.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's an honor, it's a pleasure to be with us, to be with you, and thank you for joining us here. We're celebrating the Hispanic Heritage Month, and also this specific year, we are celebrating a very important event here in the Old San Juan area in Puerto Rico. It's the 500th anniversary of the foundation of the city of San Juan. So, which is really important for us here and for the history of the whole Caribbean. And thank you for being with us today. Today, from Castillo San Felipe, we're going to talk a little bit about the life of the Spanish soldiers that were sent here to Puerto Rico centuries back and established here in Old San Juan, specifically in Castillo San Cristobal. Castillo San Cristobal is an old Spanish fortress built starting in 1634 to protect the entrance of the city of San Juan from landside attacks. It's perhaps the largest fortress built by the Spanish in the New World. And it took around 150 years to be completed. Okay? So it was considered impregnable. No enemies were supposed to conquer this by combat, by battle, in the 1700s. So we're going to talk a little bit about the soldiers that were living in this place, keeping in consideration that we're talking about the 1700s, a time in which the Spanish army became professional for the first time in history. That means that during the 1500s and 1600s, there was an army, but soldiers were not considered professional. That means that they were joining the army, they were fighting, they were following orders, they had a structure of the army, but did not have the elements that we consider of a professional modern army. I mean, with that, the uniform. Soldiers back in the 1500s, 1600s did not have a uniform. They were wearing different clothing. The only element that was the same in every Spanish soldier was that they had a distinction. They had a feather or a ribbon on the hat, and it was red. So anybody wearing a red ribbon or feather on the hat means it was Spanish. Aside of that, there was not a uniform, and there could be a big confusion on the battlefield. The second thing to consider, regulations. Soldiers were not living under an official regulation of a professional army. So troop quarters, barracks like this were not in place until the 1700s. Most of the soldiers back in the 1500s, 1600s, they lived in the city. They rent rooms for the neighbors in the city. They built very humble houses in the city. They even lived outside of the city. So there was no troop quarters as an official army, a professional army, until the 1700s. And that's when we start to see a place like this. It was a barrack, a troop quarters, with an area for them to rest, to sleep. First thing to consider, 1700s army, not the same like today's army. Even though discipline is very important and is an essential part of the military life, if we go back to the 1700s and even before, soldiers were lacking a lot of benefits, a lot of good treatment that soldiers receive today in comparison with centuries back. We're talking about a time in which soldiers were part of the government that was ruled by a king. It was a monarchy. That means that we're not talking about republic or talking about democracy. soldiers were considered part of the state, belonging to the king and belonging to God. That was the mentality back in the monarchical system. So with that said, that means that soldiers were not living necessarily comfortable here. They were lacking a lot of things that we consider essential for our normal daily life. So that's when we go, for example, to the beds. A very basic thing that we consider essential for us to live in a very comfortable environment at our homes. Beds. We want nice mattresses. We want nice, comfortable beds. We want to sleep well. We want to rest well. Unfortunately for soldiers, they were not able to choose that. They were provided with some kind of wooden platforms like this. Very hard wooden platforms, no mattresses. Soldiers left one aside of the other, sharing space, very narrow bedding areas. We need to think about this. Thanks to anthropologists and scientists, we know that back in the 1700s, even before, not only the Spanish, but we go to the people from the Mediterranean area, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, etc. Most of those people were shorter, way shorter than us today. The average height of a soldier was around 5 feet tall. 5 feet tall. So that means that a 5'1", 5'2" would be the giant of the troop. It sounds funny, but that's how the way it was. So they were sleeping in very narrow, short beds, sharing space, not comfortable at all. Think about this. No privacy. No privacy. You have to share space. They need to spend the day together. They used to play games, to spend time at some point. They play music with their guitars. They tell stories. Those soldiers that could read and write, most of the soldiers were illiterate. Unfortunately, most of the soldiers were illiterate until the 1700s, in which the soldiers that were stationed here, mostly artillerymen, began to be educated. They were sent to academies, and that's part of the professional army style that I was talking about. So those soldiers living in this place, they were able to read and write starting in the 1700s. And that was a major advantage if we compare them to the infantry and navy soldiers that usually still back then illiterate. Soldiers were poor people, not able to go to school. Like, thankfully we are able to do that now. So most of the soldiers were educated late, and if they were poor people, they will be not educated at all. And that was not a very happy part of the story, okay? So the bedding was hard, narrow, and short. Another aspect of the soldiers, we can talk about the uniforms. By the 1700s, the Spanish soldier will start to use the typical 18th century hat, the three-point hat, the three-point hat, and they also could use a two-point hat. And all the Spanish, as I mentioned at the beginning, they will be wearing a red ribbon or feather, meaning they were Spanish. This did not change at all. The uniforms could change, they were dressed better, but they still used a red ribbon or feather on the hat, meaning they were Spanish, okay? Other things to consider: the jacket on the uniform. In this case, the soldiers stationed in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean back in the 1700s, they knew way before us that colors in the tropic and the hot environments, in the heat areas, if you wear dark colors, that was not good. If you wear wool uniforms, that was not good. So they learned how to live here and dress in the correct way. So they used linen and cotton, that was much better for the tropics. And they used white uniforms or uniforms in light colors. So they knew back then in the 1700s that it was much better to dress like this, white, linen and cotton, than having a dark blue or black uniform in another material. So this was the standard coat for the Spanish soldiers born in Puerto Rico, known as the Puerto Rican Fixed Regiment, the equivalent of today's Army Reserve. Those soldiers were born in the island, were usually white soldiers, and those were considered semi-professional. Not in the same degree than the Spanish, but they had a lot of privileges and they were respected as semi-professional, okay? Very good. Another important part of the uniform, and this is very interesting because this perhaps has not changed a lot today, is that when we go to buy our clothing at any store, we want to feel comfortable, of course. We find that the best shirt, has to fit really comfortable, looks nice. Same thing with the trousers, socks, whatever. But there's a part of your clothing that usually takes a little bit more for some reasons for you to decide what to buy and how good they look and how they fit on you. And I'm talking about the shoes, okay? Shoes have always been a special part of our clothing. Usually, if you go to the store to buy a pair of shoes, you want them to be comfortable. The material. If you're going to run, if you're going to play basketball, baseball, if you're going to walk, keep standing during the whole day. If you want a comfortable shoe, you're going to look for that. Soldiers back then, in this case, Puerto Rico and the colonies, did not have that choice at all. To make things more difficult, this is an example of a pair of shoes used in the 1700s. Officers will be using of the leather. The part of the leather will be for the officers, the shiny part of the leather. Soldiers will be wearing the inner part of the leather, that was not the shiny part. But the worst thing is that the shoes were extremely hard, uncomfortable, very, very hard. The size, you were not going to choose your specific size. There was no mass production like today. So you receive a pair of shoes, that's your pair of shoes, and you are going to look how to fit on them. To make things even worse, there were not a left foot shoe or a right foot shoe. It was the same shape of the shoe for both feet. So literally, the soldiers destroy their feet, when putting these things on. They spend a lot of time getting used to this, walking around, struggling a lot before getting used to this. So of the whole uniform, the worst part and the most difficult part and the most important in some ways were the shoes, because they could be the difference between enjoying using your uniform or hating using your uniform, okay? Very good. Another important part of the uniform, a very interesting one, which is part of the soldier life and the weapons. We're talking about the musket, which was the standard weapon for the 18th century soldier. Okay, this is a Spanish musket, model 1772, 18th century, 1772, caliber .69, used to shoot a lead ball. They will be using a bayonet and the musket as well. And the difficult thing with this is the accuracy that the soldiers could reach with this musket was not the best, for sure. The estimation of the range of this musket was easy over 100 yards. 150, it could reach 200 yards. But the accuracy of this musket was set and calculated in around 47 yards of those over 100 yards. 47 yards, and if you calculate the accuracy, the average was not the best. So they could shoot a lot of bullets with this. The problem was to hit the target. Very important things to consider when they were shooting a musket. This is a heavy weapon, around 15 pounds for a 5-foot soldier. Okay, it was a real challenge. Other thing to consider, and it was even taller than the soldiers sometimes. Sounds funny, but it was true. When you had the bayonet, this could be taller than the soldier. Okay. Another thing to consider. Okay, The humidity here in the Caribbean and Puerto Rico is horrible. That's why Kina mentioned at the beginning, we're melting here. It's because it's very humid. We sweat a lot. When they used back then gunpowder, that was a major problem. Gunpowder became wet, humid and wet, and was useless. And that happened very often. So sounds funny for us today if you want to think about that. Two armies facing face to face, trying to shoot their muskets, and none of those armies could shoot a single shot. There were missed shots all the time. Nobody was shooting a single bullet at some point because the humidity damages the gunpowder. And that's the moment in which, if they were close enough, they will change the strategy, put the bayonet, and that's when they will have the direct combat, body to body. That was something they would like to avoid. But that might happen sooner than later because of the environment here. The humidity is too bad, and they will be forced to use this musket as a bayonet, as a spear or a sword, depending on the combat range. Right? Okay. Talking a little bit about the soldier, what they did here daily for their recreation. As human beings, they need to recreate. No electronic device, of course, no television, no computers, no electronic games, no cellular phones. That means they need to recreate in different ways. They used to play Spanish card or briscas. They played domino games. I think that many of you, or some of you will know what domino is. It was a popular game in the 1700s. They used to play the guitar, musical instruments, the pipe, the drums was part of the military instruments they used to play the music here, okay? And they also like to, of course, have physical exercises outside as part of their recreation as well. The discipline was extremely hard, / rough. It was a hard life. Discipline was applied as a physical punishment, and it was also a psychological punishment. Soldiers misbehaving here will be having a hard time. And that means that the officers used to live in front of these quarters. These quarters were the soldiers' quarters. Officers will be living right in front of this building, taking a look at the movement of the troops. Payment. Soldiers, even though Spain was the major power in the 16th century, 17th century, and in the 18th century, still a major power, the income of the soldiers was not the best. It was a very low payment, and that created a lot of problems. Sometimes that payment did not arrive at all. They were receiving treasure shipments from Mexico to pay the troops and the fortification system, the construction. From a hurricane to a pirate to a corsair, a lot of threats outside will affect those Spanish ships reaching San Juan. And guess what? When that fleet was lost, there was no payment around. The soldiers will not be happy. So it was really hard to keep those soldiers following orders, motivated. It was really hard. And they need to look for several options to keep that discipline here. From religion, from the discipline and the soldier, there were two ways to keep them following orders. Okay? Dungeons, prisons that were around in the area as well to keep soldiers disciplined, and punishment was part of the measurements they will be using to keep those soldiers following orders. And again, not easy for them. Food, they eat everything that the land produces. Not time to say, I don't like this, I don't like that. Not enough food to be doing that. They ate everything that the land produced, and they need to collect money among the troops to buy their ingredients, their goods, their fruits, and then to cook their meals. Only during war times or attack times, that's when the government officially assumed the responsibility to pay for the soldier meals. Aside of that, during peacetime, soldiers need to take from their salary that was not good, collect money, buy their goods on the market, and then they were able to cook their food. That was not good as well. So uniforms, the ones you see that, so there, they need to take extreme care with the uniform, especially with that coat, that jacket. The government provides soldiers with the first uniform, complete uniform. After that, soldiers were responsible for keeping the uniforms complete and in good conditions. If they lose a button, that was the soldier's problem. And they will be looking around for some soldiers putting a jacket in the wrong place, and they will be stealing others' buttons. And that will be normal to happen, nothing good, but that will happen. And they knew that. So soldiers need to take extreme care with their uniforms and belongings, knowing that other soldiers will be looking around if the moment provides for somebody to take something from others, okay? One more thing to point out is that the army was a way for poor people in Spain to look for a better life in the Americas, in this case in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean. Puerto Rico meaning rich port in English, rich port. So those soldiers coming from Spain, when they heard about Puerto Rico, rich port, poor people, they were dreaming about treasures, about those magnificent and marvelous stories of the Americas, of the El Dorado, and those great lands they could conquer and become rich. So they came to the New World looking for that rich port to become rich. No internet, remember that today if you're going to travel, before going to any place, you can Google and look for destination, learn about every single thing about the destination you're going to go. And you can get ready ahead of time, knowing what to expect. Fortunately, that's for us today. Back centuries ago, no way to know if those fantastic stories were true. In fact, many of them were just legends, myths. So when they came here to Puerto Rico, to Richport, and disembarked in the island, unfortunately for them, they were facing a rough military life. The Spanish called the garrisons at the beginning presidios. That comes from the Latin, from the Roman, presidios. And presidios is the Spanish word for prison. So that's how tough military life was, how disciplined and how controlled it was, okay? Very important to consider that. So many of those soldiers coming also to the New World, to the Americas, came as a way of escape, of committing some crimes in Europe and Spain. Think about this. Today, when you're looking for a job in any company, in the government, the army, you have a background investigation. They took your fingerprints and they check for your background if you are doing things good or not, deciding on that, they will give you a job or not, That's today. Centuries ago, guess what? Oh, I'm a soldier, John Doe, and I want to join the army. They needed soldiers. In many ways, they were lacking the ways to learn about your past, about your real life. You could lie. You could say, no, I'm a shepherd, I'm a shoemaker, I'm an artisan, but I want to fight because I want to improve my life. I want to have a better life. They will send you here. And in many instances, those soldiers coming here had a criminal background. And sometimes here is when they knew that, because as soon as they got here, they will be sharing space with others. And that's when the real personality of many of those soldiers came out. And that's when you get people stealing from others, fighting with others, and sometimes even killing others. That happened everywhere. Didn't matter, it was Spain, it was England, France, happened everywhere. Soldiers coming to the New World, having a criminal background, and trying to find a way to escape. And the army was one of the best and first choices to do that. Okay? So here, if you take a look at the room, again, the platforms to sleep, uniforms, and the beds. From here, you will be able to see perhaps on the wall, over there on the wall, the steps taking on the top. Soldiers will be able to wake up really quick if there was an attack. they will have to dress really quick there and going upstairs. That's a shortcut to the main battery for cannons for the defense of this place. So engineers provide soldiers with many features, including ways for them to be more effective in combat, to move around quicker and more effective. So these rooms that for us today feels hot as well, not very comfortable, they had a nice ventilation system. Breeze was coming here all the time, circulation of air. The engineers that designed this very well. Today, for safety, you know, and we're a park, national park, and some of those features were not safe for visitors because they are exposed, there are openings, so they were closed in some areas. So that's why ventilation breeze is not coming here anymore, and we feel this now when we're inside of these rooms. Doesn't feel very good, but back then, centuries ago, it felt much better. Okay. Now, when the U.S. Army defeated Spain during the Spanish-American War in 1898, the Spanish Army left Puerto Rico, and this was also used as a military base by the United States. Times changes, technology changes, history in that context changes, but the U.S. kept using these places as a military base for the U.S. until they were able to build modern military bases for their troops, accurate for First World War and specifically and especially for World War II. Okay, so this was it with the military for the Spanish soldiers. Now, if you have any question, any comment, anything to add, or anything to bring, I will be more happy to listen to you and to help you out.
Great, thank you so much, Carlos. We do have some questions. First, early on, you mentioned how San Juan was founded 500 years ago. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, very good. So, to make the long story short, San Juan was founded in 1521 by the relatives of Juan Ponce de Leon. Juan Ponce de Leon did not found San Juan. He actually was named governor of Puerto Rico. He was in charge of the island by that time, but very interesting is that by that time, he was leaving to Florida. He also discovered Florida, right? So he was traveling to Florida, and almost at the same time, the neighbors were moving to San Juan. He was killed in action against the natives in Florida. He later died in Cuba, actually. He was moving from Florida to Cuba. He died there from the wounds of combat. So San Juan was founded in 1521 by the relatives of Ponce de Leon and the Spanish functionaries. And when we consider Puerto Rico part of the U.S., we can say that we have the oldest European settlement and city in the U.S. territories in that context.
Great, thank you. If we were to visit your site now, what other things can we see there?
Very interesting. Yeah, we have a lot of features. I want to mention that San Juan National Historic Site, which is comprised of several structures, was named a World Heritage Site by the United Nations, the UNESCO, in 1983. The system here has plenty of things of opticals that options you can find, and very different ways to look out here, from the history, the architecture, the engineering, the weapons. So here we have San Cristobal, that I mentioned you, that perhaps the largest Spanish fortress in the New World, but we also have Castillo San Felipe del Morro, that was built at the other side of the city to protect the entrance by water, and that is the oldest of the two. That one started in 1539. Also, most of the city walls that's still standing today are part of the park, are administrated by the park, okay? So we are holding most of the old city of San Juan in terms of the historical structures, most of the military structures, but we're taking care of, if we go and do this analogy, we're taking care of the skin of the city. You know, the walls of the city are administered by the National Park Service, are part of the park. So once you come to San Juan, you will be able to see the streets, the housing, the stores, but once you look all around, the old structures, you will see the walls of the city and the fortifications, and those are part of the walls. We have a dungeon, El Morro with 6 levels. We have San Cristobal, 3 levels, and tunnel systems. Very interesting tunnel system designed to defend the city through the underground in case of attacks. We have a World War II bunkers. One of them are visitor center. You take a look at how a World War II bunker actually is. Cisterns designed here to collect rainwater to allow the soldiers to survive in this area. So we have a nice system of cisterns to collect rainwater. So there are several features that we'll be able to see and look around. Very interesting, all of them. Yeah.
That's amazing, and this looks so well preserved. When did the preservation of all of this start, and what's sort of the process today of keeping everything preserved for future guests to see?
Yeah, very good question. We need to think about this as a major project. Since the very beginning, when the Spanish put the first sandstone block, actually the materials of construction are sandstone blocks, limestone, bricks. Those are the 3 main, aside of wood, of course, as well. So since the first block, and we say this as a little bit of joke because it sounds funny, but it's real at the same time. They need to think about preservation. The same Spanish need to think about how to keep this in good conditions. It was such a massive project that took around 250 years to be completed. The whole system, the whole city. So think about it. When they were 15 years of construction, 70 years of construction, 100 years, they were already thinking about, okay, we need to go back to the first structures because they're already in bad shape. So for us today, it's even more difficult in terms of how times, the years have passed by, the weather conditions, the impact of the humans in the structure. So officially, by the Park Service, the park was founded in 1949. So the preservation by the Park Service started in 1949. But the US Army was here since 1898, and they were already also taking care of the structures in a different way, of course. Today, we know that we need to keep this using the best materials as possible. And I'm talking about the most compatible materials. Sand, we have a laboratory. Our masons are great. They have a laboratory in which they test the different samples of sand, lime, clay, and they choose the best and the most and the best one for this to match the structures in a way to keep this in the best way as possible. Trying to avoid cement. The US Army, they didn't know that back there in the early 20th century. Unfortunately, they didn't have the studies and the materials available and those things. So they use a lot of cement, trying to do the best. But cement is not good for this. And that's why part of our work has been trying to remove the layers of cement step by step and adding this plaster of stucco, which is called stucco, which is basically lime, sand, a little bit of water, and covering this with the correct layer of materials. Has been very difficult, expensive. We rely a lot on the visitor's fee, the payment at the entrance. We charge a fee as many parks, as most of parks actually, because it's an expensive process, and we need to do that because it's our treasure. So, but yeah, it has been a long process of learning. But again, since the very beginning, it was a constant process of trying to keep this standing.
It does sound difficult and expensive. It's great to see, and it's interesting to think of all the work that goes into this. We have some questions more about the soldiers now. How long did a typical soldier serve for?
Another great question. When I mentioned about the professional soldiers, one of the most important things that soldiers still having today is like some kind of contract. Soldiers signed like a contract today, and they were expected to serve. It depends. It could be 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. Thinking about this important factor, life expectations were different back then, shorter. So people were not expecting to serve 20 years in the army. Like today, you can serve 20, 30 years. They could do that, but they were not expected at all because life expectations were short. A lot of threats from disease, especially injuries, battles, and limitations in the medical treatment, etc. So for soldiers to serve in the army, let's say 8 years, that will be a great number for them. A realistic number, 8 to 10 years as maximum. Again, we have a lot of documentation telling us about the veterans. In that way, veterans. And those were literally veterans, talking about 15 years, 20 years. But usually, and this is very serious and really sad if we think about this, usually when you look at the document, when you have the word veteran, right aside, the status says useless. And that's a strong word. When you read that on the paper, because he was lacking an arm, a leg, useless. So that means had the experience, but they could not perform as a soldier. So that's the conditions in which many of those soldiers ended, unfortunately. It's because their life was so tough, so hard, that they need to help in the construction here by hand. Soldiers were used in the construction here alongside prisoners, alongside some slaves, alongside people from the city. Soldiers were building this place. So accidents were everywhere. Accidents were the weapons. They tried to escape, desert. They were not, many of them wanted to escape this place. And they were caught and they were put into jail. So the expectation of life was shorter. So let's say 8 years. That would be a good number for a soldier. Could be more, and of course, could be less.
It sounds pretty brutal. Were there any major mutinies or revolts by the soldiers ever?
Yep. A lot of them. We know about, and that was one of the major concerns of the officers and the government here. We can mention, at least we can mention one of them, which was really shocking. And considering the time could be said as a little bit pretty late, mid-1800s, in which the Spanish government back in Spain, the monarchy, the queen back then was a queen actually, it was literally a revolt in Spain. It was a kind of civil war in the mid-1800s. And then it had repercussions here. The people felt the results here of those struggles in Spain. Soldiers learned about that, and like today, they had their political beliefs. Many of them were pro-monarchy, others were pro-republic, because back then, those ideas were just coming in, and people were starting to learn about the republican kind of government, because remember, Spain for centuries and centuries was a monarchy. But finally, they learned about liberty and freedom and republic. So there were two major factions, monarchy, republic. So those soldiers supporting the republic here, because there were soldiers that were, again, two factions, one day they decided to revolt. And early in the morning, they woke up right here from these rooms here in San Cristobal, because the revolt took place here in San Cristobal. They woke up early in the morning, they pick up their weapons, they ran up to the upper levels of San Cristobal, they moved the cannons that were originally facing the outside, the landside entrance, and they moved them backwards towards the city. And they woke up the neighbors of the city, shouting and screaming, first, or you pay us, because they were always money for the troops, or you pay us or we're going to fire. And you can think about the people in the city. There were people expecting soldiers to protect them, to defend them. They were just aiming at them. So we know about, thanks to documentation, people, civilians, waking up, scared, and leaving the city, fleeing the city, desperate. The governor had to come here in person to deal with those soldiers. Spend the whole day looking for a solution. At the end of the day, literally by night, they found an agreement. Okay? The governor left San Cristobal. The next day, early in the morning, all the soldiers left the place and went to make a formation in the city square. That was part of the agreement. The governor got there next day, early in the morning, and he went to the troop and said to them, okay, I'm here, I gave you my word, we had a deal. I'm going to write a letter to Spain requesting an increase of your salary plus the payment of the salary the government owes you. And I'm trying to ask for to have a shortened contract on you, because one of the demands of the soldiers was they want to serve less years in the army as well. They were really demanding things. Remember, thinking about the human rights, civil rights, new ideas back then. So the governor said, I'm going to do that because that was my word, but I want something in exchange from you. I want the responsibles of this mutiny to have a step forward. 45 minutes later, there were around 5 sergeants executed in the fields of El Morro by shooting for treason. So once you got a mutiny, there was a real serious event in which, in this case, soldiers found what they were looking to. The governor to hear to their demands, the government to try to fix their problems, but it had a cost. And it was a real hard and huge cost. It was lives involved here because it was considered treason in many ways. So that's a good example I can give you about the mutiny in this place and the results. There were many more, of course.
No, thank you for sharing that story. It sounded like such a respectful ending at first, but that's interesting to hear. All right, so we've seen some artifacts and the actual location. Do you have any written surviving documents from the soldiers themselves while they were there?
Okay, unfortunately, most of those documentation talking about specific soldiers are in Spain. We need to think about Spain is considered, and is famous for that, as being a huge, the bureaucracy was invented in Spain, literally. So here, you could not move a musket from the wall, and this is a joke we do today, we say today because it sounds funny, but you could not move a musket from this place before putting that in a letter, requesting the permit, or saying we're moving this, to this point. There are hundreds of thousands of documentation back in Spain that unfortunately we don't have them available here in Puerto Rico, that we know for sure there's tons of information about soldiers, events that we are not knowing now because those are in Spanish archives. And we are relying in, individual research from perhaps studies, students in history doing their PhD or their thesis to go there and do research. We're depending on them because actually it's very difficult for us to go there, and find them. It's not impossible, but it's a difficult task. So we know about that. There are thousands and thousands of documentation telling us about names of soldiers. We know about some of them. In fact, in the Cultural Resources Division, I remember that, I used to work there some years ago, and we have a log of an officer, Spanish officer, original one from the 1800s, very exciting because it has a picture of the officer and his handwriting, and it's like a log. He was actually writing about inventories of what they had in the ammunitions and the weapons. Really interesting. It was a personal log of an officer, and we have that there with its picture and everything. But we're lacking a lot of information that we would like to know about those soldiers. One more thing we'd like to point is that we know about the prisoner that was in the dungeon in San Cristobal, who was there for around 20 years, which is really impressive. And there's a book that was published in Spain maybe 20 years ago. And that's why we know that, because there was a research in Spain about a specific case, and we knew that that person ended his days in a jail in San Cristobal. And that's how we knew that, because in Spain they did a research. So that's why I'm talking about that. We will need to somehow get into Spain and find a way to look for those documentations.
And it's a shame that you don't have more of that information available, but it's really interesting, especially for our students watching, especially the aspiring historians, of how much work there is to be done. And it's kind of exciting to think about what stories might come to light in the future. And that kind of leads us well into our last question for today. And Kina, if you'd like to answer this one as well. Would you mind sharing, either of you, your kind of personal story of what got you here? I know a lot of our students are interested in working with the Park Service someday or being historians, so either any advice or anything you could share with them would be wonderful to hear.
Of course, something that is very interesting is that both Carlos and I started as students. I started as an intern, and then SCA Student Conservation Association intern, and that's how I was able to get to know a national park, even though I'm from Puerto Rico, and I did visit Castillo San Felipe del Morro many times as I was a kid, flying kites and all that, good and fun things kids do here in San Juan. I was not really aware that I was visiting a national park, much less a World Heritage Site. It isn't until I'm doing this internship that takes me here to this park to work here and develop a recycling program that I'm able to get to know more about the mission of the park, the mission of the whole system in itself, and I get to understand more why I wanted to work here. So I started doing a master's in environmental education in order for me to get hired as a step student in that program as a park ranger. And then from there, when I graduated, it was the longest 120 days of our lives when they are, waiting to let you know if we're going to, be hired as a permanent employee. And when you know that you are, it's awesome. It's refreshing. And how many years have you've been here already?
I think it's 21 already.
21, myself 18. And this has been our only national park so far, but it has been an amazing experience. I've been able to meet people from all over the world. I have been able to work with people from different parts of the United States, from Europe, so Latin America, Mexico. It has been awesome. This experience opens your eyes to, for example, probably before I wasn't that curious about World Heritage Sites. Now when I travel, I'm trying to look for national parks, for World Heritage Sites, for that type of meaningful information before I travel to make sure that I'm visiting those special places.
It's wonderful to hear, and great advice. And just Kina and Carlos, thank you both so much for being with us today and sharing this story, and we truly appreciate having you here with us.
Thank you for the invitation, and we look forward to keep collaborating. And we invite everybody to keep, following our Facebook page. We're going to be keep celebrating the 500 years of San Juan, the city of San Juan. So we're going to have different activities, fun activities, interesting and entertaining, such as this one. So thank you so much, Katie, for planning all this and helping us, behind and on scene. It has been wonderful working with you.
Of course, you as well. And I'll share the link to your page in the chat too, so if anyone would like to check that out.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Gracias.
And thank you everyone at home for joining us today. Please tune in again next week on Tuesday. We'll be joined by Dave Gutierrez, the author of Patriots from the Barrio. So I hope to see you there, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Bye.